Welcome. Have you ever stopped to think about where our ideas of government, law, or even some of our languages actually come from? Well, today we're going on a whirlwind tour through 1,500 years of Western history to connect those dots. We're going to start with the incredible blueprint of the Roman Republic and follow that story all the way to the end of the medieval world. Let's get right into it.
Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this massive story. First, we'll look at the Roman blueprint and the foundation they laid. Then we'll watch how that mighty empire eventually crumbled. After that, we'll see how a whole new feudal world was forged from the ashes, and we'll finish up with the cathedrals, crusades, and collapses that brought that era to a close.
All right, first up, Rome. And let's be clear, this wasn't just another ancient civilization. Rome was an absolute powerhouse. I mean, they built a legacy in law, engineering, and culture that's so enduring you can still see it today. We're about to find out how they did it. So, at the very heart of the early Roman Republic was this game-changing idea. See, it wasn't a direct democracy where everyone votes on everything. Instead, it was a system where citizens elected representatives to make decisions for them. Sound familiar? It should, because that Roman model is basically the blueprint for many of the world's democracies right now. But as Rome got bigger and more powerful, so did its generals. And you know, nobody was more ambitious than Julius Caesar. When he seized power and basically declared himself dictator for life, he sent a clear message. The old republic, the old system of sharing power, it was over.
And just look at how fast it all happened. Seriously, in just a little over 20 years, Rome goes from a centuries-old republic to a dictatorship. Then its dictator gets assassinated, and then, boom, it emerges as a full-blown empire under Augustus. It was just an absolute whirlwind of violence and change.
But out of all that chaos, something incredible was born. Augustus kicked off the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. And for 200 years, the empire was stable, it was prosperous. Just picture it. Amazing aqueducts bringing water to cities, beautiful mosaics on the floors, and new philosophies like Stoicism taking hold. And it was all tied together by a common language, Latin.
Then came a pivot that would literally change the world forever. After centuries of being an outlawed faith, Christianity gained its most powerful convert yet. When Emperor Constantine made it the official religion of the Roman Empire, he didn't just change Rome, he laid the spiritual and political groundwork for Western civilization for the next 2,000 years.
Of course, no empire lasts forever. So now let's look at how this seemingly unbeatable superpower, which had dominated the world, started to fall apart. And it wasn't one big event. It was more like a slow, painful decay from the inside out.
You know, this slide tells a really crucial story. Rome wasn't just conquered, it was rotting from within. We're talking about out-of-control political corruption, runaway inflation that made money worthless, and taxes that were just crushing people. Even being a Roman citizen, which used to be this huge deal, started to mean less and less. The very foundations were cracking.
So while Rome was getting weaker on the inside, a massive storm was gathering on its borders. The terrifying invasions of Attila the Hun created this huge domino effect, pushing wave after wave of Germanic tribes right into Roman lands. And they weren't always invaders. A lot of them were just desperate refugees. But the empire was already so strained, it just couldn't handle it.
And this is the date that just echoes through history. The year the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire was quietly removed from power by a Germanic chieftain. It wasn't some huge, fiery explosion. It was more like a final, quiet breath. The empire was gone.
So here's the bottom line. For centuries, Rome had been the glue holding everything together. Law, order, roads, you name it. When it disappeared, it left this giant power vacuum. Suddenly, Europe was fragmented, chaotic, and it desperately needed a new way to organize itself.
So what grows from the ashes of Rome? Well, a totally new system, one that was completely decentralized. This new world wasn't built around a powerful central government. No, it was built on something much more personal: land, loyalty, and service.
And that system was feudalism. Try to imagine a world with no national army to protect you, no police force. Your safety becomes a totally local issue. In that kind of world, power belongs to whoever controls the land and can offer protection. And that became the basic organizing principle for the next 1,000 years.
The whole system really boiled down to this simple personal contract. Think of it like a two-way street. A powerful lord grants a chunk of land, called a fief, to a lesser noble, a vassal. In exchange, that vassal promises the lord his loyalty and, crucially, his military service when needed.
And this created an incredibly rigid social pyramid. You had the lord at the top, who owned the land, then his vassals, the knights, who provided the muscle, and at the very bottom you had the serfs, the peasants who worked the land. Everybody knew their place, and there was almost zero chance of moving up.
Now, for a brief, shining moment, it did seem like a unified empire might make a comeback. A king named Charlemagne built a massive kingdom and was even crowned Emperor of the Romans. But these moments were rare. The day-to-day reality of the medieval world was all about local power held by local lords. Okay, let's jump into our final section, where we'll look at the dramatic forces that shaped the late Middle Ages. This was a time of incredible faith, really brutal warfare, and a world-changing disaster that ultimately brought the whole feudal system crashing down.
In this era, the Roman Catholic Church was, without a doubt, the superpower of Europe. It was this unifying force across the continent. You could see that devotion everywhere, in the awe-inspiring Gothic cathedrals they built, in the intellectual quest to blend faith and reason, and of course, in the massive holy wars known as the Crusades.
And here you see one of the great ironies of history. The official goal of the Crusades was to take back the Holy Land. Militarily, they failed at that, but they had this massive unintended consequence. They reconnected Europe to Asia, reopening trade routes and sparking a huge exchange of goods and ideas that had been dormant for centuries.
You know that classic symbol of feudalism, the knight in shining armor on a huge warhorse? Well, his time was coming to an end. During the 100 Years' War, a new piece of tech changed everything, the longbow. Suddenly, a peasant archer could fire a storm of arrows that could punch right through a knight's armor. The whole game had changed.
But the thing that truly shattered the medieval world wasn't a weapon at all. It was an invisible killer, the Black Death. The plague swept across Europe and wiped out more than a third of the entire population. It's almost impossible to imagine. But this horror had a revolutionary side effect. With so few people left to work, the surviving peasants actually had bargaining power for the first time, demanding wages and freedom and turning the old feudal order completely upside down.
And that brings us to this single, pivotal year. It's incredible. In the very same year that the centuries-long Reconquista finally ended in Spain, a sailor named Christopher Columbus convinced the Spanish king and queen to fund a voyage west. It was the end of one long medieval chapter and the dramatic beginning of a brand new one.
So here's the crucial takeaway. The medieval world didn't just slowly fade out. It collapsed in this perfect storm of war, disease, and new ideas. And it was that very collapse that cleared the ground for what came next, the incredible rebirth of the Renaissance, the age of exploration, and the dawn of the modern world we live in today. The end of one world was truly the beginning of the next.